What up, Wizards? It's Dev from the place, and we got some Tuesday Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers for you, baby, and there's not a whole lot of them today. We didn't get the typical deluge of cards, and that's because we're entering the back stretch. There's not too much to go, just a couple more days left in spoiler season now, but that does not mean that we are running out of good cards to look at. But as usual, all that said, you got to start somewhere. So we're going to look at some commons and uncommons first, like we always do. But I guess the good news today is that there's really not a whole lot of these to look at. We only got like 3 lower rarity cards today. And even though 2 of them aren't amazing, that last one looks like it might be worth some. So let's get through the first 2. First, we're going to look at Humbling Elder, as well as Unsparing Boltcaster here. Now, Humbling Elder is just a single blue mana for a 1/2 human monk. It's got flash, and when it enters, a creature an opponent controls gets -2/-0 until end of turn. Don't we already have this card in Standard? The Cogwork Brawler? I might be getting the name wrong, but that's a little artifact guy, and it has the benefit of being an artifact creature, whereas this doesn't. And it's also a cute little guy. And this has its benefits, don't get me wrong, but it's not a cute little guy, so, just saying. But either way, I'm not sure that this card is too great, so we should save the time we would spend talking about this card, talking about better cards. That said, we should also talk about Unsparing Boltcaster here. 3 mana, 2 red for a 3/3 Ogre Wizard. When it enters, it deals 5 damage to target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. This is not like super duper rare to see in red, but you most often see abilities like this in black, right? They're mostly for limited, where you get a creature that comes down post-combat and kills something that got blocked on your opponent's side, or that did block, or whatever. So, it's not like this is super uncommon to see a creature like this, but again, nowadays we mostly see these in black, and there's like 1 in every set. It's a different variant of the same creature, so I guess it's a little refreshing to see it in red, but it's still not great, right? So let's move on to what I think is the best uncommon of the day and the final lower rarity thing. It's Kin Tree Severance. This is Abzan color, so 3 mana, but it's one of those cards where you can pay 2 mana instead of any of the colored pips in the casting cost, so keep that in mind. It's an instant. You exile target permanent with mana value 3 or greater. That is a good-looking magic card, kids. Like, even if you're playing it in just a 2-color deck and you pay 4 mana for it, it's still okay because you get the exile. I do see people gushing over this card today, and I just kind of did there a second ago too, but to be honest, I kind of feel like nowadays, 3 mana, exile any permanent at instant speed is kind of the going rate. You know what I mean? Like, the card's not busted or anything, and it's not necessarily above rate or whatever. It's just like the correct rate for what it does, and I don't see it being like a 4 of or anything, but a 1 or 2 of if there is an Abzan mid-range deck, sure, but even there it's got some competition in the removal slot, so we'll see what ends up happening with it, but obviously it's a pretty attractive card. And in Commander, I could see this seeing a good amount of play too, because the targets, the number of targets you have for it are just like infinite. Hello, it's me and my face again this early in a video. Usually you have to wait 25-30 minutes to see my mug again, but figured I'd come on back because I missed you. I know you missed me. Do you a favor because I'm a very pretty lady. Now we're going to get to the rares because we're out of other cards to look at. Seems like the right way to order these operations. So there's only 6 rares today. Go ahead and let you know that, but there is some real quality in these slots. On that note, though, I'm going to look at a card first that I see a lot of people going goo-goos over today, and I'm just not sure I'm on the same page, man. Let's take a look at Sage of the Skies here. Now, this is 2 and a white for a 2/3 flying lifelink, and if you cast another spell this turn, then you get to copy this guy when you cast it. Okay, so I can see why people are going a little nuts over this. Seems all right, especially in terms of like just normal value-based magic. You play creatures, I play creatures, couple removal spells. Maybe we'll draw some cards from time to time. That's how you play Magic, but I'm not sure that Standard is really that kind of magic right now, just to be honest with you. And you have to wait until like turn 4 to get this guy on the table. And like some of the plays are okay. If you do want to copy it, on turn 4, you can cut down into this and get a couple of guys. You can always lay down arms into this and get a couple of guys. And then you've taken a guy away from their side of the table, added 2 guys to yours, baby. This pendulum should swing in your favor pretty fast. Typically, if you're able to pull that off. But again, we're in a pretty like sweeper-based Standard in some ways right now, but we're also in this like really aggro-based Standard in some other ways. So I'm just like not convinced that this is exactly where you want to be. And you can make the argument it's a decent play against aggro, which there's a lot of right now, but you still have to wait until turn 4. Like, if you want to cut down their mouse and play this guy, you gotta survive till turn 4. And, like, you could easily do that, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to happen every game, man. So I'm just not, like, as excited about this as I see some other people kind of going crazy for. I guess it's a human monk. Maybe monks are relevant. Maybe humans are relevant. I'm not too sure, but one way or the other, this seems like a pretty cool looking dude. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm going to give him some points. He doesn't seem that bad or anything, but he also just doesn't seem to really deserve the hype that I've seen him get in some circles of the internet so far today. I'm going to go ahead and move on. I don't know if you guys are ready for that, but just let me know how you feel about Sage of the Skies in the comments, because I've mostly seen positive stuff about this today, and I just want to know how you feel. Maybe I'm just dumb. I don't know. But we're going to look at Thunder of Unity here next. This is a Mardu saga. It costs 1 of each Mardu color, red, white, black. For a saga, already said that, but on chapter 1, you draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. On chapters 2 and 3, whenever a creature you control enters this turn, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I am into it, man. Kind of a Corpse Knight or an Impact Trimmers or War Leader's Call. You know, there's a bunch of stuff like this in Standard right now. I like that this is kind of like a War Leader's Call that does something the turn it comes out. You know, if you play War Leader's Call on turn 3, you probably don't have any other mana laying around to make more creatures, right? So it doesn't really do much on that turn unless it buffs a couple of dudes, right? But Thunder of Unity will always draw the 2. It comes into play, and that just seems like a pretty good deal to me. The one problem I have with that is that in these War Leader's Call decks with Impact Trimmers and all that, a lot of it is set up for the first few turns of the game. And if you'll find that if you play like Impact Trimmers on 2, War Leader's Call on 3, you haven't actually done anything, and your opponent is hitting you in the face like repeatedly. It's bad, dude. You're probably going to go to the hospital or whatever. So I'm not sure that you can resolve this on 3 in a lot of games and deal damage to yourself and not just die to your aggro opponent like the next turn when you say go. So like, there's some issues with it, but I do really like that, you know, chapters 2 and 3 will help you catch back up on any life that you've lost and like really give you like some big like unleash your hand turns in terms of like how much you get onto the table all at one time. So you can use your first couple of turns to kind of set this card up, play it on turn 3, and then turn 4 and 5 like go off in air quotes, you know. So I'm a big fan of stuff like this. You guys know that I like drains. Just like any card that says like deal 1 damage to them and you gain 1 life, I'm instantly in love with. So I'm trying to judge this objectively. I don't think that it's great. There's a reason I made it the second rare of the day, but it is a card I will be trying. You guys know I never met an Impact Trimmers I didn't like, so we're going to be doing stuff with that. But we'll move on to Jeskai Revelation up here. This is a mythic from today that costs 7 freaking mana. 4, a blue, a red, and a white for an instant. Return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. Jeskai Revelation deals 4 damage to any target. Create 2 1/1 white monk creature tokens with prowess. Draw 2 cards. I'm not done. You gain 4 life. So the other day, while we were live on Twitch doing previews, I was talking about that 5 mana Jeskai spell. It's like a redirect damage and you draw a bunch of cards. And I was like, is this a thing? Is this actually like really, really good? And you know, everyone in chat's like, dude, this costs 5 mana. And they're probably right. This, on the other hand, costs 7 mana. So if that 5 mana card's too much, I'm pretty sure this is too much. But I think this is a nod to like the ultimatums. You know, it feels ultimatum-y to me. It feels, honestly, like if it ever is cast, it probably has a pretty massive effect on a game, but I could be wrong. You know, it only, quote unquote, only draws you 2 cards. It only, quote unquote, again, does 4 damage to a target. So if opponent has Sheldred or Biza or Overlord of the Mistmoors or whatever, like you might not, you know, or Archfiend of the Dross, or the 6/6 from, you know, Unholy NX. There's like so many things that this doesn't hit, right? So, you know, 4 damage might not take their best thing off the table, but if that's the case, I guess you can always just bounce it. It says you can return a permanent, so. But I guess when this is strongest is in response to a really big spell they're trying to cast. It's going to kind of be tough to thread that needle, I think, a lot of the time, considering how much this costs. But even if you don't bounce a spell back to their hand, I still think that, like, during combat or EOT, if you do have the space for it, is going to wreck the board. You know, gaining 4 life is going to be pretty relevant at this stage in the game most of the time. Obviously, replacing itself twice is good. You make 2 1/1s to block with and maybe blow up one of their other guys. You know, this can wreck an entire combat step. By bouncing one guy, blowing up another dude, blocking another 2 dudes, you gain 4, draw 2. Like, if you actually do succeed in resolving the spell, then, like, yeah, it's going to hold them off for the turn, which is probably what it's mostly designed to do. But, you know, I'm not sure, again, at the end of the day, that this is swinging the pendulum as much as you needed to for 7 mana. But again, the instant speed might be really good on this. And let's not, discount the fact that the last time we saw a spell like this reminds me a little bit of like a Magma Opus or something like that. And that costs like 8 mana, and we were like, this will see no play. And it did see play, because there were ways of like cheating it. There are ways of like caring about how much it cost in your graveyard, if you remember that. And we have stuff like that now, like Collect Evidence would care that this is a 7-drop in your graveyard, right? So there are things you can do with just the fact that it costs this much. And if you're playing things like Omniscience, obviously this doesn't cost anything to cast in the first place. And so, there's other things you have to consider when you're looking at really expensive spells. But this is one of those that I'm really on the fence about, which is why it's like right in the middle of the rares and mythics today, is that I could buy that this card could be worth something, man, in a game of Magic. But 7 mana, it's probably you don't want to draw it in your opening hand. It's going to rot in your hand most of the game. There's going to be plenty of times where you die before you get to it, and it's going to make you mad. So I'm just not like sold on this, but I could be. But up next, we'll look at a perfectly normal little commander here. And usually when people say that nowadays, they mean that it's not normal, right? But this, honestly, I feel like this is very normal. You're going to look at Felothar, Dawn of the Abzan here. So Abzan colors, a 3 mana, white, black, green, 3/3 legendary human warrior with trample. Whenever it enters or attacks, you may sacrifice a non-land permanent. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that you control. Okay, so you play this and you immediately stack a guy, and you have a 3 mana 4/4 trample. But it's not like we don't have that in standard already, right? We got the Toxic guy. That's a 3 mana 4/4 trample. He's like way easier to cast than this, and you don't have to sack a guy. So there's that. But obviously, when you attack with him, you can sack another dude, and suddenly he's a 5/5 trample that you only paid 3 for. And that's looking a lot better, especially if they're creatures that you don't mind sacrificing anyway. We got like Cold Conscript, Forsaken Miner. We got Bloodghast in this format just recently. So there's a lot of like creatures in Abzan that could easily come back from the graveyard at like minimal investment. So, you might have a little thing going. And obviously it's in like Illisil Core and Bartolome colors. So I should probably bring that up, but I'm not sure it goes in those decks. Although maybe those decks could use like a tall trample attacker. It could work. Another sack outlet. I'm not like saying it's terrible. As a matter of fact, I think if you're building like Abzan Aristocrats and Commander, this could be an interesting guy to have in your command zone, But one way or the other, again, like all that just comes together to me to make a pretty normal Magic card. And I'm a guy that loves sacking creatures, and I'm saying that. I love this color combination, and I'm like, what else you got? So I'm not saying he's like terrible or anything. And he could even get up to like a 6/6 and start doing like real damage in games. The fact that he's got both enters and attacks triggers, that tends to be really powerful. You guys remember Titans? Those are really good, So I shouldn't discount his power level too much, but it does seem like one of those things that, if I'm adding 3 drops to my deck, I got to get past Glissa, Sentinel of the Nameless City, Liliana of the Veil, Preacher of the Schism, it's like in this color combination, there's so many good options. I'm not sure we really get there. But let's look at the 2 best rares of the day by a good bit, I think. First, we'll look at Lucid Prowler. 4 mana, 2 and 2 green for a 5/5 Snake Ranger. When it enters, you may mill cards equal to the number of lands you control. Okay, so no downside yet on this 4 mana 5/5. Also, Renew. This is a wild looking ability here, so just peep up your ears. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green, and of course you exile this guy from your graveyard. It's a Renew ability. You put X +1/+1 counters on target creature, X being the number of lands in your graveyard. Of course, you activate this at sorcery speed. So X +1/+1 counters for 2 mana. So that could be anywhere between 2 and 8 +1/+1 counters. If your deck is engineered, to put lands in its graveyard, either by milling, and this lets you do that when you play it, but you can mill, you can discard cards. There's plenty of decks I've got in my stable on Arena right now that just chuck lands into the graveyard like it's nobody's business. So, you could easily have 5 lands in the graveyard. It is nowhere near unheard of. And then 2 mana for 5 +1/+1 counters on a guy is a crazy Renew ability, man. Even if this got milled into your graveyard, and I guess I should point out it can mill a copy of itself into your graveyard when you play it fairly easily. So, that's a thing with Renew. And if they kill this with a Go for the Throat or something, that's another Renew ability. So, this could easily lead to more power toughness once it's in the graveyard than it had while it was out. It could Obi-Wan, you know what I mean? You strike me down, I become more powerful. So this could, even though it's a 5/5 when it's in play, it could very easily, put 8 +1/+1 counters on a guy if it's, long enough into the game or you've milled enough cards into your yard. So, this could actually do the majority of its damage after it dies. But the cool thing about it, on top of all that, is that it's a 4 mana 5/5 with a sick enter the battlefield trigger. Mill 4 at the very least, you know, if you play it on curve, mill 4 is good, man. There ain't a whole lot of creatures in standard, to be honest with you, that mill that many cards when they come into play. And this has a, you know, really high ceiling. Sometimes you'll play it when you've ramped and you've got like 7 or 8 lands in play, and suddenly mill 8, you got to worry about decking yourself, obviously. But if your whole game plan is to put stuff into your graveyard, this does it beautifully. So this is a really good Magic card, man. Like, not only in standard, but again, I'll talk about Commander for a second, where I feel like it's even slightly more busted in that format for a couple of reasons. You know, there's a lot of lands going around in that format. If you spend your first couple of turns like cultivating or whatever, then this is going to mill a lot when it comes into play, and your opponents still have to do something about it. A 5/5 is a solid body boy. So apart from that, though, dude, this just the best part comes again when it's in your graveyard. I could see a deck milling this into its graveyard on purpose just to get the value from it later, especially considering mill decks are going to put like 30 cards into their graveyard like hella fast, you know? So if people still saying hella, I just did it. But either way, they're going to put a lot of lands in their graveyard relatively quickly, so this could legit put 10 +1/+1 counters on a creature on like turn 5, you know? Like, it's really not hard to see that happening. So just an absolutely demonic dude here that, you know, after all that gushing, I still have to say that he has to like find a place in standard. But this like Lumra, you know, Aftermath Analyst, put lands in your graveyard kind of deck is kind of coming along right now. So we'll see if this guy has any work to do. Just the mill ability is pretty attractive. But final standard playable rare of the day, I choose my words carefully, is Dragonfire Blade here. This thing is kind of crazy. 1 single mana for an equipment that equips for 4, but the ability costs 1 less to activate for each color of the creature that it targets. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has hexproof from monocolored. So here's my thing. This card seems like a mistake. Right. Am I just going nuts here? Am I just really bad at card evaluation? Is Sage of the Skies, don't answer that. Is Sage of the Skies like amazing and this is just horrid? You know, maybe I'm losing my mind, and like the farther you get into spoiler season, do you get like card evaluation fog or something? We should really come up with a name for it. But one way or the other, I think that my radar is correct on this, man. It only costs 1 mana to get into play in the first place. That's couple mana less than most swords, so we're already looking at a decent deal. It says equip 4, but it's always going to be really at least equip 3 unless you're putting it on an artifact creature. But if you're putting it on like most creatures, it's going to be equip 3. So fine. On a 2-color creature, equip 2. That is actually a great deal for what this does. This basically says it can't be targeted by like the majority of removal in standard. Can't be targeted by Get Lost, Lay Down Arms. Can't be targeted by Go for the Throat or Cut Down or Anoint with Affliction or like any black removal spell. Shoot the Sheriff, like you name it. Those spells ain't going to kill it. Like, it can still get killed by like some spells that we're playing right now, and there's some spells in this set that could end up like killing the creature you put your blade on. But altogether, dude, I think most times this is going to be a fantastic deal. You go ahead and get it onto the table as your 1-drop, start playing Magic on turn 1, and then starting on like turn 3 or 4, you can start equipping it to things. And like, yeah, they're going to be a little vulnerable while you're trying to equip it, and that's probably the worst part of the card. But ultimately, man, if your opponent taps out, you can really punish them for that by basically making sure they don't get to cast a removal spell on this dude for the rest of the game. So just absolutely insane, dude. It doesn't give it any sort of like, oh, if it's attacked and unblocked, this thing happens like the traditional sword would. But just the +2/+2 is a decent enough bonus, especially depending on how cheaply you're equipping it in the first place. So I actually really stinking like this thing, and I think that it's above and beyond most of the cards today for sure. We got one more thing to look at before we get out of here. We're done with standard legal stuff, but, you know, last week I have been looking at a couple of cards from each of the Commander decks that they previewed because I thought they were cool. I didn't get to do that yesterday because we looked at so many standard legal cards, but we got a couple extra minutes today, so if you don't mind, I'm going to go back and pick a couple of cards from the Abzan deck that was previewed yesterday by Commander at home. Want to be on your show? Give me a ring. But either way, I thought there were some really cool cards in that deck. That said, the Teamer deck got spoiled earlier today, and I want to look at some of that stuff too. Just a couple of cards from from each. Let's pick our favorites. That's actually kind of tough to pick my favorite 2 cards from the Abzan deck. It had a couple of really sick things, like a sort of aristocracy flavored sweeper in Tip the Scales that I did like. You would probably assume that if you saw the card. But Jaws of Defeat is another card that seemed kind of wacky. A neat little Pandemonium or Warstorm Surge effect that cares about the difference between power and toughness. These are neat, but my 2 favorite cards from yesterday were Canopy Gargantuan and Rampart Architect. Now, Rampart Architect looks like a really good creature, man. 4 mana, 3 and a green for a 3/4 Elephant Advisor. When it enters or attacks, you get a 1/3 white wall creature token with Defender, and whenever a creature you control with Defender dies, you may search your library for a basic land, throw it onto the table, tap, shuffle up. So it gives you one of these dudes with which you can do that, like when it enters. So it almost says, when it enters ramp. Not necessarily, but it kind of also says when it enters, negate all combat damage from one non-trample, non-flying creature. You know what I mean? It's like the wall is going to block for you, die, and you get a land. But when it attacks, you get this ability too. And it just cares about defender creatures, period, not just these dinky little walls it's creating. So like in Arcades the Strategist or some other kind of commander that cares about defender creatures, this could go off like crazy, get you a ton of ramp. Just really neat dude here, man. I liked him a lot. But Canopy Gargantuan, man, this is definitely Timmy bait, but it's the kind of Timmy bait that I think is actually really good, and I'm going to take it every time. I see the box propped up by the stick, with the delicious plate of mozzarella sticks inside, but I want mozzarella sticks. I don't care. I know it's a trap. I'm going to upset the stick. The box is going to fall on top of me, and I'm going to be trapped, but I'm going to be trapped in there with these delicious mozzarella sticks. That's exactly how I feel about this card. I am taking the bait. 7 mana, 5 and 2 green for a 7/7 dragon with flying and ward 2. At the beginning of your upkeep, just listen to this. Put a number of +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control equal to that creature's toughness. So even if you have a bunch of 1/1s, they all get a +1/+1 counter. But obviously, a lot of your creatures are going to be like 3 toughness, 4 toughness, 5 toughness, or even above. So all your biggest butts get, like 5 counters every turn, which is just unbelievable. You do have to wait an entire turn to come back around for you to get this ability on your upkeep after you cast it, but that's not that big of a deal, right? It's got the ward too. If somebody has to devote an entire turn to removing this, I'm sure they will, but again, when you do get the ability, it just kind of wins. How many turns of this ability do you really need to win a game of Magic, especially if your deck cares about counters and creatures get more counters when they get counters, or stuff happens when you get counters in the first place. Yeah, you could really pop off with a dude like this. And with all the ramp and commander, especially in green, I think that 7 mana is not that bad in terms of asking casting costs for a creature that does freaking this. So just crazy. Again, I'm aware of the concept of Timmy bait, and I think I might be falling just super hard for it, but I don't care. I am very into it. But moving on to the Teamer deck, no offense to it, but it was a lot easier to find 2 cards I really liked from this one than it was the Abzan one. So let's take a look at Thundermane Dragon, and especially Become the Avalanche. That's a powerful looking card, but so is Thundermane Dragon. This is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 4/4 dragon with flying. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast creature spells with power 4 or greater from the top of your library. If a creature spell is cast this way, it gains haste until end of turn, baby. So that's pretty wild little incentive to play this particular iteration of this card. This is kind of like an Experimental Frenzy or something for large creatures, but apart from Experimental Frenzy, we honestly don't really see this ability in red that often. We more likely see this in green a lot of the time, right? So we get Vizier of the Menagerie, but it's red. It can only cast huge dudes, but so, your Dragons deck is going to have mostly dudes that fit this criteria. And just your normal Gruul deck or something in Commander is going to have creatures you can mostly cast with this. So seems pretty powerful as a red sort of card advantage piece, So I've always liked effects like this. And sure, they can be stopped by hitting a land on top of your library, but they typically lend to, or lead to more card advantage than you might think. So always a big fan of effects like this, but always a big fan of stuff like Become the Avalanche too. Jeez, man, this is 6 mana, 4 and 2 green for a sorcery. Draw a card for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. Then creatures you control get +X until end of turn, X being the number of cards now in your hand, which you have freshly stocked with 1,000,000 cards. So this isn't Shamanic Revelation or anything. Usually you see Revelation in decks that play a bunch of smaller-ish creatures, elves or something. You draw a card card for each creature you control when you have like a million 1 and 2 drop elves is really, really good. This is not going to draw anywhere near as many cards as Revelation usually does, and it costs an extra mana, but Revelation doesn't have a, by the way, you also win the game right now kind of mode on it. You know, note too, the way this is worded, that you're just drawing for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. However, every creature you control gets, you know, the +X until end of turn. So that is a mighty overrun effect right there on top of drawing, you know, what, like 4 cards or something, you know, pretty easily. I don't think that it's that hard to get 4 cards out of this. So massive card drawing green, and obviously in some board states, you're going to draw 6, 7 off of this. So just an absolutely wild card in a lot of ways. Amazing hand refill for green, even if it only does draw like 2 or 3. Again, you know, you're still drawing a bunch of cards, and you're getting an overrun for a turn, which might take at least one person out of the game. So yeah, I think 6 mana is a proper cost for this, and it's always going to be like a fantastic Magic card. But whoop whoop, before we get out of here, there is a brand new card. I have just reloaded Mythic Spoiler for like the 8th time since I've started recording this video, and there was a brand new card, so it must be super fresh vintage right off the line. Let's take a look at Frontline Rush here. This is 2 mana, Boros colors, so you're just paying a red and a white for an instant. Choose one. Either create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, or target creature gets +X until end of turn, X being the number of creatures that you control. So this is a pretty funky uncommon, dude. This is pretty good. Now, I'm not sure that it's as good as Kintree Severance we looked at earlier, but it might be, man. You know, effectively, you get a Resolute Reinforcements at instant speed, which is, I mean, Resolute Reinforcements is instant speed, right? But you get Resolute Reinforcements that puts 2 very relevant creature types into play right this second in Standard. But the Pump Spell mode is also pretty righteous, right? Like, this could easily give +4/+4 just out of nowhere, you know? So I like that about it, too. And it might end up in, like, a Boros Mice deck or something. You know, it creates a couple of creatures for you to cast Pump Spells on. I guess that's a thing. But, you know, in Mice, this could pretty easily give, like, +3/+3 +4/+4. I think there's probably better things to be doing in Mice, right? But in, say, Boros Convoke, where this is just another copy of Resolute Reinforcements that fits your colors anyway and has an extra mode on it, I think you might just play this over Reinforcements, right? Because that extra mode could be fantastic on like an Imidane's Recruiter turn or something. If you got a couple extra mana and they let like a 1/1 through, which they usually have to do, then suddenly they're taking 6 from that one guy. So yeah, I could easily see it in that deck, and you know, even in just like commander decks, obviously. But mostly I like this as a not only a limited card, I think it's very good there, but as a potential standard card, I think this is real, man. A thing that puts a couple of bodies into play at instant speed for a, you know, pretty efficient cost, but can also be a dope, you know, as much as 5/5, you know. But even, I want to stress this before we get off this card, though, and wrap things up today. Even if this only gives a creature like +2/+2, depending on the sitch, that might be all you need, man. Deal that last couple of damage or get a creature just above the trade rate in combat. A lot of things this could do, man. So I actually really like this uncommon a lot. Whew, that was a good way to finish things off, man. Sick uncommon there. But that means that there is incentive, in fact, to stay through the commander stuff. I hope you didn't click away when we got to the commander things. Of course you didn't, because I wouldn't. You're here. I'm talking to you, so I guess you didn't. Unless you just scrub through. I don't know what you do. Use YouTube however you want to. Either way. That's Allski Kowalski for today. I regret to inform you, Lewitsky, but that is in fact Itsky. Just let me know how you felt about all the stuff down there today. There wasn't too much to talk about, but like I said, the stuff we did get to talk about, there's a lot to talk about with those cards. So hit me with your thoughts and opinions. They always generate an interesting discussion. But one way or the other, I guess that's all, ski guys. Just do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. You know, I don't have to tell you anymore, but I feel like I probably should anyway. You got to hit that like button. It's shaped like a thumb. Super easy to miss. It's the one like a thumb. Just hit that one. You can sub to the sandwich if you want to see the rest of the spoilers and all the other content we're doing. It seems maybe do that. I don't know what percentage of you are subscribed. All the other YouTubers are out here like, oh, I see that only 50% of you are subscribed. Did you watch my video? I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm sure it's too low, so go ahead and sub. Apart from that, Patreon. We have one of those. Just $1 a month. You can vote on what decks we do and other content for that matter. Once we get into Tarkir Dragonstorm spoiler season and before the month is out, we will be putting out our first poll of the season, so go ahead and get in there. One more thing, moving the stream to Friday this week, and on Friday around 8:30 p.m. EST or something like that, we'll be reviewing every single card in this set, speed running through this dang thing, and assigning a numbered value to every single card what exists in Tarkir Dragonstorm. So follow on Twitch. I'll leave a link in the description. You'll be there Friday night, but even if you're not, we'll put the VOD on YouTube. You'll see it. But that's basically all I got. I'm donezo for this onezo, and I'm also out of catchphrases. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.